coming up on this episode of the Roundtable. It is an interesting contrast with, for example, the DeSantis candidacy, which moved in exactly the opposite direction, which appeared on the national stage fully confident that it had a winning message and platform for the new conservative movement in 2024, and suddenly discovered that those people were actually like 5 Twitter users with big accounts. That's kind of what happened. And people like me were surprised to find this because I am immersed in exactly that world. And
you control really 2 of those accounts, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely so. Like, I won't say which ones, but there you go. Yeah, like that kind of reality came hard and fast at the DeSantis candidacy in this way. Trump's errors, if there are any, are on the other end of that spectrum. He's, if anything, much, much too willing just to say and do what he knows is gonna hit home.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I am your host, sometimes host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I'm joined by Seth Barron, managing editor of the American Mind, James Pullis, editor of the American Mind, and Spencer Clavin, super special editor of the American Mind. I forget. Are you just special editor now?
What was I'm the Avengers X-Men editor, I think is the
okay. This is now going to be a running gag. Good.
Okay, great.
Spencer still working on the American Mind, but devoting more of his time to CRB these days, which is good because we love CRB, and I would say we're making it great again, but it was never not great.
Mackerbug make CRB still great.
Yeah. I apologize if I sound like I have a bit of a cold. I was just a quick intro by way of what's going on in the world this week. I was at NatCon this week, and it's still going on today. Here we're recording Wednesday on the 10th, but I was in D.C. and got up at 3 a.m. this morning to fly back to Texas, in time to take the kids for school. Those of you contemplating a move to DFW, the great perk of it is you can fly everywhere quickly. So for those of us that fly a lot, it's a nice perk, although sleep deprivation is often the result. Pretty interesting NatCon. I introduced Vivek Ramaswamy last night, who gave a speech trying to distinguish national libertarianism for national conservatism. I think he's got a new book coming out in September about the future of America First. Lots of other interesting speakers there, including Balázs Orbán and then the normal litany of folks, including a couple of panels that I helped put together. One on lawfare with John Eastman, Mike Howell, Will Chamberlain, and John Yoo on it. And then one on China, decoupling from China with David Goldman, our own David Goldman, my former boss and former head of the Claremont Institute, Brian Kennedy, and others. So anyway, check out NatCon. There's it's a bounty of riches. And the best attended one yet, I think, I heard from our friend Saurabh Sharma with 1,100 people there. So interesting. Anyway, we wanted to start with the topic that the topic that keeps on giving, the gift that keeps on giving, which is the presidential debate and the continuing fallout. I will just ring my own bell for a minute here and say, I don't know if I predicted on the Roundtable, but I've certainly been saying when asked since the debate and for a while now, for months and months and months, that the nominee is going to be Joe Biden. I still stand by that. There's just not a great mechanism to remove him, and he's an obstinate old codger, and grown more obstinate by mental decline. So I think he's digging in like an Alabama tick. One of the Fox News guests said a couple days ago, and it looks like the rest of the party is split on the issue. Lots of congressional Democrats, both publicly and even more than privately, think that Biden's going to bring them down along with the presidency. So they've been arguing for him to step aside. Various grandees in the party, from David Axelrod to James Carville, have been either waffling like Axelrod or sticking with it like Carville. Carville's latest is some elaborate scheme to have two of the former Democratic presidents, that is Biden and Obama, sort of pick a slate of candidates that people choose from and consult governors. It's all too cute by half. It's not going to happen. I don't think. I'll be surprised if they swap him out. And then the final thing is, let alone the logistical difficulties and the mechanics of removing Joe, they can't really do it unless he agrees somehow. There's the question of who it will be if it's not him. And I just think there's really no way it can be anyone other than Kamala Harris, just practically. She will have all of his money. Steve Hayward pointed out a couple of weeks ago on the Powerline podcast that, if they switched to Kamala, it would be a real coup in a sense, because they have $200x million. They'll probably raise another 200 or 300 right away as the media fawns over the prospect of our first female black president. And they'll be in good shape going into the election, even with all of Kamala's faults. So am I missing anything? Probably. But what do you guys think?
I think you're probably right. And the prediction markets seem to be backing you up. There was like a 24 or 48 hour period where it seemed like her star was rising. And then I suspect that some internal polling probably told the mandarins in the Democratic Party that Kamala would not really be much of an improvement on Biden electorally. Because she's so weird. I mean, don't forget, she was the first. She dropped out of the Democratic 2020 campaign in 2019. I mean, she dropped out in December, November. She was a terrible candidate, despite all of her efforts to, have these winning debate lines like "that little girl was me" and that whole thing. It just didn't take. People don't cotton to her. And she's a little weird. I kind of have this dark view of the whole thing that the Democrats are kind of willing to take a loss this time around. That they don't really care because, okay, here's the thing: the next 4 years are going to be really bad. Like, everybody's basically predicting a recession. We're in this mess internationally. There's like 3 global hot spots that could wind up like devastating the world. And as far as Trump being a Nazi, well, okay, they've already dealt with Trump for one term, and they dealt with him pretty well. They know how to limit him. They just call out the mob to pretend to do Handmaid's Tale cosplay and dig out their hats and, just scream about the resistance and blame, like, anytime some crook breaks his leg while running from the police, they can blame him. And he's term limited. He'll only have one term during which time they can build up their bench, try to develop some plausible leadership, and storm back. Yes, there may be, I guess if they're unlucky, he'll get another Supreme Court justice. But, their long-term plan is to expand the Supreme Court anyway. And so I don't know. That's kind of like my little theory. It's sort of like when the Republicans ran Bob Dole in 96. Like, sometimes I feel like they're willing to, like, the one of the parties is willing to take a loss. Or look at like 2008, with McCain. I mean, it just wasn't like a contest. And it seemed like after 8 years of Bush, they were willing to, okay, well, let's let the other guys go. So that's sort of my perspective.
It definitely feels like 4 more years of Trump is at least the worst of they're the best of several bad options at this stage for the Democrats. I'm not sure they're really jumping up and down with eager excitement about it, but a lot of them might be reconciling themselves to the sort of inevitability of it. And as you say, Seth, battening down the hatches and preparing to run the playbook for when Trump is in office, which, yeah, made a lot of wins last time, especially during the COVID era, but throughout, and also was successful after Trump left office at reversing and undoing a lot of his signal achievements. I suspect Trump will also be prepared for that in some way. His performance at the debate, which actually was kind of overshadowed by Biden's in some ways, in that Biden was such a train wreck that nobody really paid that much attention to what Trump did, but it was meaningfully different from a lot of Trump's most high profile performances in other situations. He had clearly been working on what for him passes as restraint. He landed, perhaps in my book, his most perfect zinger that I've ever seen him deliver, which is, I really don't understand what Joe Biden just said. It was it was a masterclass in understatement, right, which is not the word you typically associate with Trumpian rhetoric, but he managed to get away through that performance kind of miraculously when you consider what a liquidated disaster train wreck Biden was. It's amazing that Trump managed to get out of that without people just feeling sorry for him, which they would probably have done if he had done what he did back in 2020 and come out like a bull in a china shop, just really landing every punch he possibly could. So
there's the second part of that zinger too, which sort of digs in the knife, but in a way that I think everyone, and I don't think he does either.
Right. That was great. You're right. And exactly, like, it was so graceful in this funny way, not gracious necessarily, but like very delicately done, that it actually made me come away thinking, perhaps Trump has learned some things and will adapt for this, new presidency, if indeed he gets one. And then when you review, the suite of options on the Democrat side, the last thing I want to say about this is just that there is kind of a running conspiracy theory in some corners about how, well, they planned this all along, and you're an idiot if you don't think they kind of knew he was going to be this bad, because this is their exit strategy, that they understood he was going to belly flop, and that is how they're going to gradually pretend to realize that he is this bad, because it has given, I think, a lot of Democrats psychological license to admit what they otherwise were trying desperately not to admit. But if you look at the panic, the abject terror in the eyes of these Dem operatives, and then you consider, like, logistically what it would mean to switch it out, the fact that Biden actually has a lot of control over the situation, terrifyingly, it just seems impossible that this is what they wanted to have happen. I sort of am sticking to my old interpretation that they long ago committed to riding this train out and just didn't realize the wheels would come off so quickly. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris, for all her signature lines, really is quite burdened by what has been. She's not able to move forward into the sunlit uplands, including if you get a Biden second term somehow miraculously. This problem doesn't go away. Biden just somehow expires in the second term, clearly becomes incapable, literally unable, either through his eventual inevitable demise or just through his ongoing decomposition. And then you're stuck with Kamala, who is no better as a president than as a candidate. So maybe, Seth, the least bad situation here would be Trump.
Yeah, it's all fairly weird. I'm feeling pretty good about my characterization of Biden as kind of the black hole at the center of the political universe on the left right now. Feeling pretty good about my characterization of, like, every faction in Washington as being pretty weak. Trump seems to be the only person or group whose stock has, like, noticeably risen, who seems like stronger, more vigorous than last time around. At least at the top tier. It does seem to me like Kamala's best chance of making it in is to just ride this thing out. It seems that at least as of now, the Obamas are content to kind of toy with the situation until there's some kind of clarity. whoever's making the drug cocktails for the president is a very powerful person. It's interesting that we don't know who this person is or kind of what the oversight is there. Like, this person or these people have what seems to be almost complete control over which Joe Biden we see at any given time. And it would appear, if court intrigue is as bad as we might imagine in Washington, that whoever really wanted to get rid of Joe would do so by just like bribing whoever's mixing the drug cocktails. Probably the biggest incentive toward keeping Joe Biden, I think, is that this is a guy who is intended to be like the last white male cisgendered heterosexual Christian president of the United States. And so he's the guy who should lose. Like, you don't want to replace him with the next generation intersectional box checker and watch that person go down in flames. And as large of a constituency as the box checker might have, larger than what was 4 years ago, even AOC is out there, at least for now, saying, I'm riding with Biden, end of conversation. So it's tough. It's tough to push Joe aside and find someone else who all the pieces seem to fit together. I mean, Kamala and Mayor Pete and Gretchen Whitmer doesn't want, like, nobody's really ready. Not even Michelle Obama, apparently. So keep the guy. Let America's last white male president lose at the ballot box, and America's orange male president will have one more go.
Yeah, it's it's certainly been an interesting summer so far. We've got the two conventions coming up, so it'll certainly be something to watch. Speaking of the conventions, we also wanted to talk about the GOP platform, which has been causing a bit of a stir because for the first time since 1984, I believe, and don't believe the headlines on all of this. When you get into the details, I'll get into this. It's a little less crazy than you'd think, but it abandoned the long-time call for a national abortion ban, or at least the implicit call, citing the 14th Amendment's protection of life as the vehicle for that. So some pro-life groups are a lot, actually quite a few pro-life groups and a faction of the GOP are up in arms about this. The new language, so the sort of top line of the GOP platform is new in the sense that it's very streamlined and almost a bullet list. I just want to, for our edification, if we look at the 1984 GOP platform, the whole thing, preamble and all the rest, it is, when I paste it into Word, it is 58 pages and 27,000 words and change. The new one, if you take all of it, including the preamble, is a crisp 5,300 words. And the top line takeaway is a list of bullet points that's, basically the table of contents for the longer platform, which by historical standards is much, much, much shorter. As you heard, probably a fifth of the size of its normal girth. It's 20 bullet points. And I can just read them mostly because it's worth doing. Some of the delegates who pushed back against the objections from pro-lifers said, look, this is easy for me to go out and sell. It's clear. It makes the case a very strong case. The campaign is talking about it as, here's how we restore America first. Seal the border and stop the migrant invasion, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history, end inflation, make America affordable again, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far, a nice Trumpian flourish, first exclamation point in this document. Stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower, large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips, second exclamation point. Defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. Prevent World War III. I think we can all be in favor of that. Restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East, and build a great Iron Dome missile defense shield over our entire country, all made in America. End the weaponization of government against the American people. Stop the migrant crime epidemic. Demolish the foreign drug cartels. Crush gang violence and lock up violent offenders. rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again, strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world, keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age, cancel the electric vehicle mandate, and cut costly and burdensome regulations, cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children, keep men out of women's sports, deport pro-Hamas radicals, and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again, secure our elections, including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship, unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. Oddly, so the top line on the actual American Presidency Project page does not have that abortion language. The longer version of the life section of the sort of readout below all the bullet points. So interestingly, the abortion thing is not in the top line bullet points, but it is number 4 in the longer document, and it reads the following way: We proudly stand for families and life. We believe that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States guarantees that no person can be denied life or liberty without due process, and that the states are therefore free to pass laws protecting those rights. After 51 years, because of us, that power has been given to the states and to a vote of the people. That's, of course, a reference to Roe. We will oppose late-term abortion while supporting mothers and policies that advance prenatal care, access to birth control, and IVF fertility treatments. That was the section that caused the most controversy. I think it's obvious what the Trump team is doing. Of course, the committee on the platform consisted of, I think, 13, 14 people maybe. They met for a few days last week in Milwaukee. Our own Mike Anton was on that committee. I'm not breaking any secret news. It's all public. And what they're up to, of course, is acknowledging, I think, the fact that has been evident since the midterms, if not longer, which is that the pro-life movement and the maximalist case for the pro-life movement in party platform and in national policy projects or hopes is just not that popular with the majority of the American people. So Trump has been trying to distance himself from some of the more stringent abortion protections that were passed by some of the states, although he acknowledges that, look, this is part of the virtue of overturning Roe. You're going to have a different policy in Ohio, as he said at the debate, a little more liberal than you'd think, and a different policy somewhere like Alabama, more conservative than many would like. But this is democracy, so it's good. Comparisons to Douglas and the Lincoln-Douglas debates and the slavery issue have come out, this seems to express some indifference or neutrality on the life question, but without any language about life starting at conception and all the rest. But I think it acknowledges a brute national political fact, which is that you need to do a lot more persuading and winning of hearts and minds at all levels, whether it be the normal pro-life groups going out and making their case to the people in various ways at the micro level and at the macro level, and the national party that has stood for life, that is the Republican Party, making that case as well across its diverse array of party apparatuses at the state level and its candidates, depending on what their districts are like and all the rest. I guess in my case we are firmly pro-life at the Claremont Institute in a maximalist way. The sticky question of what do you do nationally with legislative power and then at the state level is a question of prudence. Do the most good and the least harm should be our guiding light on this. Maybe this doesn't quite strike the right balance, but I think read charitably, it acknowledges this fact that nationally the issue is drifted away and to the left of the traditional stance of the Republican Party. What did you guys think?
Lots to dig into here for sure. IFV, it's if population trends continue on their current trajectory, probably within the next 5 years, we are going to hear open calls for just like the government running embryo farms. We need more people. Let's clone them. We need more organs. Let's harvest them. Whether it's going to come from here or South Korea or somewhere else first, I couldn't possibly comment. But I think a lot of people are going to be shocked or caught flat-footed to discover how quickly the tenor of this kind of debate over the embryo goes from, but nice, well-meaning people should be able to have kids, to we need to order up 10 million human beings, and they're not going to be delivered the natural way. I think that's coming, and I think people should start preparing themselves now. Beyond that, the thing that jumped out to me in the platform was, smashing the cartels. Like, I would be interested to hear how one might go about smashing the cartels. Seems like a really heavy lift, and a big mess on the border. Obviously, we have a big mess on the border right now. But gosh, I don't know. That's the United States hasn't had a war on its southern border for a long time, and the border looked a lot different back then. So, if anyone has further thoughts on this topic, I'm open to being persuaded, I guess. But as of right now, color me skeptical.
Yeah, James's DMs are open for action plans on smashing the cartels. On the abortion thing, Ryan and James too. Look, it's been 50 years since Roe. The law is a teacher, and the tragic fact is we live in a time and in a country where there's a dispute over which entities are covered by the term person. And this abortion debate is not the only place where that dispute is raging, although maybe it's the most acute example because it raises extremely tender questions about the most vulnerable possible entities that might be understood as people. And I think that the confusion is evident even in the language that you read from the platform, Ryan, because although it does in this Trumpian way endorse states deciding on their own and sort of understands the Dobbs decision as having had that effect, it also yokes the discussion to a constitutional amendment, which is, in fact, by definition, a federal nationwide principle. And that the kind of question that this is at a philosophical level does, I think, ultimately have to be resolved nationally. So the position that you hold on it is inevitably going to be maximalist in some sense or another, because you're going to have to come up with some definition of what is a person and who gets those protections. And I'm a private citizen and an armchair commentator, and so I get to state quite plainly that my position is that life begins at conception, and whatever complexities and moral difficulties arise from that have to be sort of dealt with as they arise from that starting point. But that's because I'm not a politician in a liberal democratic order, and part of the messy and agonizing fact of politics in the liberal democratic order is that you live in the country you live in, and I don't live in a country where it's popular and where I can vote for a candidate who's meaningfully going to get in and keep the country afloat, and also say exactly what I say and believe exactly what I believe right now on this question. It's going to take time and it's going to take persuasion, and that means in this system maneuvering and putting forward political documents like this platform. The other country that I would love to live in that I don't live in is one where serious policy debates meaningfully alter a robust party platform that then I can rely on to be enacted in office. But that's not what this is either. Like, gone are the days where that 58-page document represented the meeting of the best minds in the conservative movement to hammer out what we actually believe. Like, people are also kind of reacting to this on both sides as if it were somehow settled law, like Trump's going to get in and just do everything on this list. But as James indicated, there are logistical barriers and obstacles to that. And there are also just reality barriers to reading the document that way. This is the statement that Trump thinks he can win on. I suspect there's truth to that, given what we've seen so far about the public's reaction to this issue. And I'm sorry, but despite my maximalist position on the question at hand, I just can't go with the people who are saying, well, no concession ever is acceptable politically on this issue. And so we must, defect from Trump or something over this. Like, okay, in that case, you will definitely never live in a country where people are more conservative about this than you want them, than they are right now, just in terms of how this works politically. So I don't see what other route forward really there is besides something like this. Maybe not this exactly, maybe it's not perfect, but something like this is going to happen on the road to a more conservative stance.
Yeah, I mean, look at it this way. Okay, on the other side, there's a small group that believes that there's a bright line of where there's right on one side and evil on the other, right? And that issue is Palestine. And there are members of the Democrat Party who believe, like in their hearts, that there's no question that Israel is like a Nazi genocide state and the US is essentially also a Nazi genocide state. And they will brook no compromise on this issue. And that's why they're, not going to vote for Joe Biden. Of course, then there's realists like the Squad who claim also to believe that Israel is a genocidal state. But of course, they're also completely foursquare behind Joe Biden. They're totally riding with Biden. Look, purists make terrible friends. The fact of the matter is, the pro-choice, the pro-abortion element in America is like really strong. And you can get a lot of women to like don their hats and their Handmaid's Tale outfits if they think that that you're trying to interfere with their uterus. And there's a much smaller number of people who are going to take to the barricades over the issue of birth control pills or preserving like eight cell embryos as full human beings. It's just not very persuasive. And I personally think that Dobbs was like this so liberating for the Republicans because, maybe this is like this might be a counter perspective. It took abortion out of the federal and national political discourse to a certain degree, and certainly outside of the presidential discourse. Like U.S. presidents no longer have to, or candidates have to, like stake their careers on this. It just becomes, it's with the states now. Okay, maybe that's concession. That's a concession. Maybe that's compromise. Maybe that's compromise with evil. But, that's kind of our federal system. And I think what Ryan said is right. Like, if you really want to fight this, it has to be at the level of the heart. I mean, if you're seriously against IVF, then you have to really make a disciplined and serious approach to the conscience of the American people and explain to them why it's a bad idea. You're not going to legislate it out of existence. I just don't think that's tenable. So I actually really like this platform. I think it's great. I think it like sticks to like kitchen table, bread and butter issues about the economy and energy and deportation. I don't know. And honestly, I think like saying, yes, birth control, like, I mean, how can America, like, it seems like, how can Americans really tell like a married couple that they shouldn't use condoms? I mean, it just seems like what are we talking about?
It is an interesting contrast with, for example, the DeSantis candidacy, which moved in exactly the opposite direction, which appeared on the national stage fully confident that it had a winning message and platform for the new conservative movement in 2024 and suddenly discovered that those people were actually like 5 Twitter users with big accounts. That's kind of what happened. And people like me were surprised to find this because I am immersed in exactly that world. And
you control really 2 of those accounts, in fact.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely so. Like, I won't say which ones, but there you go. Yeah, like that. It kind of reality came hard and fast at the DeSantis candidacy in this way. Trump's errors, if there are any, are on the other end of that spectrum. He's, if anything, much too willing just to say and do what he knows is gonna hit home. But that's what a party platform is for. You know, there are other areas where that's not so useful an instinct, but I don't think this is one of them. And I reiterate that exactly the line items on this platform are not going to defy, like, Trump's not going to be held to this of all things. You know, if he's not held to what he said half an hour ago, he's not going to be held to what he said on the party platform. And he's doing with it, Seth, as you say, like kind of exactly what you're supposed to do with a party platform. And it demonstrates at the bare minimum an extremely acute awareness of exactly the kind that was lacking in DeSantis' world of what America actually is right now and who are actually the people that he's talking to. So that's an advantage.
Yeah, I mentioned that the 84 platform was 25,000-ish words. The 2024 one was, or is 5,000 and change. The, of course, launching GOP platform of the party in 1860 is 1,100 words. I would just encourage everyone to go read that and maybe compare it to 2024. I would not saddle anyone with reading the 84, 58-page GOP platform, but look at the 1860 platform and how it deals with the question of slavery. I'll also note that this 2024 platform doesn't mention the Declaration of Independence anywhere, a good Claremont theme to bring up. The 1984 platform did, but briefly, and it just referenced the decent respect to the opinions of mankind section of the Declaration at the end. Well, actually not at the end, but towards the beginning of the preamble of it, in reference to foreign policy and the struggle between totalitarianism and freedom. Just 2 clauses from the 1861, and it's in the resolved that format. So that the maintenance of the principles promulgated in the Declaration of Independence and embodied in the federal Constitution, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator, et cetera. Everyone knows that phrase, is essential to the preservation of our Republican institutions, and that the federal Constitution, the rights of the states, and the union of the states must and shall be preserved. And then the second of the references to slavery, a few clauses down, that the normal condition of all the territory of the United States is that of freedom, that as our Republican fathers, when they had abolished slavery in all our national territory, ordained that no person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That would have been the Fifth Amendment. It becomes our duty by legislation, whenever such legislation is necessary, to maintain this provision of the Constitution against all attempts to violate it, and we deny the authority of Congress, of a territorial legislature, or of any individuals to give legal existence to slavery in any territory of the United States. And that gets at a bit of the rub even over the abortion question, which is what is the federal government's authority over the issue? It's in great dispute of whether or not the 14th Amendment, which as originally ratified, was a bit of a restriction on the states, but it's an open question whether it applied the whole of the Bill of Rights to all the states, et cetera, et cetera. So the question in dispute is still what's the federal government's purview. And here the reference to Congress's authority over the territories, which was thought to be plenary, as we used to say in constitutional law, that is complete. That's where they wanted to draw the line, which is, look, where we have full, clear jurisdiction over this issue, we're not going to allow the spread of this odious practice. I think we could learn a lot from the 1860 GOP platform and all of the great rhetoric that Abraham Lincoln deployed against Stephen Douglas, and then in some of his rhetoric as president on the abortion issue. I would just recommend to everyone a great constitutional law book, slim but dense, by a former Publius Fellow who now runs one of the civic centers at the University of Texas at Austin, Justin Dyer. I forget the exact title, but he has a book called Slavery, Abortion, and the Politics of Constitutional Meaning. And he sort of does a very interesting work, of course, pre-Roe. This book is now maybe 15 years old, comparing the slavery and abortion issues. And the real rub is that both are regarded as great evils by a certain portion of the country and not by a certain other portion of the country. And so there are some parallels there, and he goes through the jurisprudence on both. Anyway, it's an interesting book and worth revisiting.
I wonder how many people are both pro-choice and pro-slavery.
No.
Yeah, it's
slavery for all.
Just
slavery for all.
Just 10 anonymous Twitter accounts, maybe. So, well, yeah, it'll be an interesting issue to watch, and we have few better guides, I think, than the Republican Party of old and its standard bearer, Abraham Lincoln, even though the issue is different. Why don't we talk a little bit about the European elections as we close out this podcast? So there was great hope on the European right, at least for the French elections, which the hopes weren't dashed, but the result was not what Marine Le Pen's National Party hoped for, or in a maximalist way. The New Popular Front, which is this leftist coalition led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who will be the new prime minister, won the most seats at 181. Macron's centrists with 160, and so the ruling coalition will be a coalition between the left and the center against Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, which picked up 143 seats, or has 143 seats, I should say. I would say hopes were not completely dashed by the French right, because this is the strongest showing they've had nationally. So I do think the right is afoot on continental Europe, as we've discussed, whether it be Germans singing about foreigners out. There's also a French version of the song, something like, I think Spencer may have brought it up previous podcast, but it's something like, you won't have too long to wait. We're going to get rid of all of you, something like that. It's better than the original French, I'm sure.
But pure poetry in French.
With some tunes set to some music. Yeah, but Jeremy Carl, I think it was, at NatCon, I was sitting in on the panel they did on sort of surviving in a post-liberal age. Jeremy, of course, his recent book is on anti-white racism, called the Unprotected Class. We've discussed it, but Jeremy brought up the point. He said, "Look, it's not like the left and the center is going to agree on everything, but when the rubber hit the road on the one defining issue in recent years in Europe came up, that is the question of the sort of replacement of the historical populations of Europe with succeeding waves of immigration, and the demographic question. The left put aside its differences with the capitalist centrists, and we should note, I mean, this is proportional representation land out in the European left. So a bit of that New Popular Front coalition includes some hardcore, maybe not quite Stalinist commies, but definitely communists and socialists. They put aside their differences with the capitalists to say no to the right's solution to the demographic question and immigration question in Europe, which is to say no more, and let's save ourselves. The resounding electoral result in France was no to that solution. So I think the right will continue to grow in power as this crisis continues to roll through Europe. But it was a disappointing night for the French right. Over in the UK, the Tories got wiped out in historical fashion after a decade or so of rule. Labour picked up 214 seats. The Tories, that is the Conservative Party in Britain, lost 252 seats. The Liberal Democrats, the Lib Dems as they're known, picked up 64 seats. Scottish Nationalist Party dropped 38, so they're hanging on by a thread with 9 seats. And then other was 36 seats total, with a pickup of 12. That includes 4 seats for Reform UK, which is, if you read the AP, is the hard right party in the UK, but we should take all those announcements with grains of salt. That includes Nigel Farage, who won a seat in Parliament for the first time from Clacton, And the question is whether or not Farage and Reform UK might replace the Tories. I think it's entirely possible that happens, and that would be historic. They've got a lot of work to do, of course, just 4 seats now. But the other NatCon thing was Suella Braverman was speaking at NatCon, and she's making a bid to take over the Conservatives and reform the Tory party in the UK. She gave a real barn burner of a speech. I suggest everyone go look at it if you're interested in this sort of thing at the National Conservatism website. Interesting things afoot in the UK. What do we think?
Well, I wish to conduct a very brief close reading of the French
Please.
Ausländer Haus. It's called Je partirai pas, and you might call it in English, you might call it good riddance or something. And it's a conversation between an immigrant and a native French speaker. And I'm doing this on the fly, so somebody will have to write in and tell me if I'm wrong. But I think that Je partirai pas is a purposefully ungrammatical quote from an immigrant that doesn't speak French very well, maybe a Tunisian or something. It means I won't go, but it should be Je partirai pas. And so you're supposed to hear that and think, oh, here's this foreigner. And then you have a beautiful illustration of one of my favorite features of the French language, which is they have a different word for yes when they're insisting on something that somebody else has denied. So there's oui if you're saying, yes, I did go to the store today. But if somebody says, you don't really want to vote for the right, do you? And you want to say, oh, yes, I will. You don't say oui, you say si. And so the next line is si, tu partiras. Yes, indeed, you will be going. I don't have anything really insightful to say about that at an object level, but I think it's deliciously French.
I mean, it seems to me like, this sort of, I remember in the 80s when Marine Le Pen's father would run and everybody would get excited about it. I just feel like I've seen this show like 4 times. And it's, look, Ryan, I hope you're right that worseism will ultimately win the day, and that like as Europe becomes more and more African, the real Frenchmen will realize what to do. I don't know. I don't really. I guess I don't share the optimism. It kind of feels like Europe continues to seal its doom, but maybe that's just really negative thinking.
Well, you know what I'm reminded of?
What?
Oh, sorry. We back in the COVID era, or the George Floyd era, I guess, the year of our Floyd, we published a translation of this open letter from retired French generals, and it was very forceful, quite well written about the existential threat that France faced from this wokeism. And we ran it because we were basically happy to co-sign it. And of course, it was portrayed as basically a fascist document, a statement outright. And you do feel that there is a sense in which the European left, the Wir schaffen das left, like needs this element as a domesticated sort of opposition. They need to be able to point to people saying this in order to maintain the quote unquote threat of fascism so that they can continue to run the kind of perma-crisis state. I will say that Nigel Farage getting a seat in parliament is kind of a major deal. This is the party that used to be UKIP. You know, they were, when I was over there, they were the synonymous with fanged, horned, demonic powers. And I think there's kind of a race between these two parties, one of which is constantly trying to like incorporate these right-wing impulses into this larger narrative about, and that is why we must all become increasingly stateless and leftist. And these right-wingers that genuinely are now in panic mode about the sheer extent to which this pan-European project has kind of dissolved the nation state. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like a totally foregone conclusion, I guess, what the outcome of that interaction is going to be. But it's also not the momentous, transformative event that you might think if you read the news, which is constantly portraying every occasion as if it were the first instance of this phenomenon.
Right. I mean, I think it's great that Nigel Farage is in, but remember, I mean, England is that bizarre, well, it's not bizarre, but their first past the post system. So if you can get a seat in Parliament with 6,000 votes or whatever, as long as you have a bunch of other people running and they don't do as well. So I mean, that's great. And look, George Galloway lost his seat, so that's also good. But 14 years of Tory rule, which every single one of them promised to stop illegal immigration, resulted in this gigantic explosion. They did nothing.
Right.
And then they kicked out Suella Braverman, right, for criticizing it. So is it going to get better under Labour? Probably not. I don't know. I'm probably just sounding very pessimistic. I've got to stop reading Camp of the Saints before bed.
Well, it's a complete mess. There's really no right in Europe. There's a far left, a center left, and a far right. That's how it's portrayed. With a bad conscience. But it sort of reflects the reality, which is that garden variety conservatism has really kind of been smothered in its sleep. And it's been a long time since I thought of Hunter S. Thompson, but I was reminded of his independent run for mayor of Aspen, Colorado, in the early 70s. And it looked like he was going to win in a three-way contest. So, of course, the local Republicans and Democrats banded together to throw their support behind, the safe, heartwarming old lady in the race. And sure enough, the crazy guy calling Aspen Fat City was narrowly defeated. This is the kind of reaction that you get. It used to be that in Hunter Thompson's day that the radical anti-statist, anti-corporatist left was seen as the great evil that needed to be kept away from power. And now today the attitude is, well, the far left, it may be wrong, but the far right is evil. And so we should always choose wrong over evil. And that's what we're seeing play out in Europe. This really perverse precautionary principle, which is, in the same way that we wouldn't want to discover that the global temperature rose by 1 degree Celsius because that means, we're that much closer to burning to a crisp. Well, we wouldn't want, to really stop immigration or migration or whatever you want to call it. We really wouldn't want Marine Le Pen to govern in France because that just, the doomsday clock on the political spectrum brings us 1 minute closer to full-blown Hitler. It's preposterous, and I understand why these fears still exist. But the reality is just so profoundly out of sync with the Imaginarium that is driving these ostensible centrists to embrace, sort of Sharia wokeism, communism, every insane sort of fringe left intersectional government over, heaven forbid, just a merely right-wing party taking power.
Yeah, I guess my only last note, Seth, about your pessimism and maybe the sort of dissenting a little bit against it is, remember, especially the French election was called quickly. I mean, things can change quickly in Europe. And I think the volatility in parliamentary systems, the volatility initiated by this rolling migrant crisis, which really, the floodgates first flew open thanks to Angela Merkel back whenever that was, 2010. this crisis will continue to roll, especially with the brute fact of population explosion in Africa, which is not going anywhere. In fact, will continue to ascend through mid-century, where you'll have, Africa will be the most populous continent around. And so the bottom pressure up north will continue and will increase. And, you can call an election quickly and reshuffle your party balances quite quickly in parliamentary systems. And so maybe you'll have the successor republic to the current French Republic will finally do something about this. Who knows about the UK? And in many ways, the UK is in bigger trouble, just given its demographic trends and its size and all the rest. I mean, you've got some Islamic candidates who won in the latest parliamentary elections, and even you've got churches being converted to mosques across parts of England. You've got European heritage, genetically Europeans. You see this interesting new phenomenon of the recently converted Islamic cop who looks like he could be Churchill's great grandson. So it'll be something to watch. We have to wrap up. We're going to have to skip read the damn site because we're over an hour. I will just substitute. We'll make up for it next week. I will substitute read the damn Supreme Court of the United States site and just talk quickly about this case, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo. We were out last week, so we didn't comment on the last day of the court, last couple of days of the court, where they handed down this opinion overturning Chevron deference. This is very close to our hearts at the Claremont Institute. We briefed the case from our Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence. A big part of our problems of the administrative state over the last century, but getting aggressively worse over the last half century, has been due to this notion that independent agencies can sort of interpret the scope of their own authority and act as junior varsity congresses without much check by the judiciary. That case is very interesting. I just would encourage everyone, if you read all of them, all of the decisions, it's 114 pages, but it's 114 pages in kind of SCOTUS format. So you can read all of them if you want and get a really good sense of the stakes. I would, if you want just the quick and dirty, read the syllabus. Chief Justice Roberts' opinion is very interesting and pretty good. But as always, if you want to go straight to the clear, constitutionally principled decision, read Justice Clarence Thomas's concurrence. So I would encourage everyone, remember Supreme Court opinions for most of our history were meant to be fairly straightforward and accessible to all, and should be read by concerned citizens. And some of the writers, even on this court, do that well, especially Clarence Thomas. So I would encourage everyone to go check that out. With that, we will conclude for the week. Thank you all for listening, as always. If you want to support our work, go to claremont.org/donate. If you want to read the magazine, go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com. If you want to see what Arthur and his team are up to in DC, go to dc.claremont.org. And of course, if you want to read The American Mind, which you should, damn it, go to AmericanMind.org. Thanks to the production and engineering team, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thank you all very much. We will talk to you next week.